Did you know that Australia now has one of the fastest growing wealth gaps in the developed world? In fact, the richest 10% of Australians hold almost half of the nation's total wealth, while the middle class is being squeezed out more and more each year. Once known for its fair go culture, Australia is quietly shifting. The dream of owning a home, raising a family, and retiring comfortably? For many, it's becoming a fantasy. So what's really happening? Why are millions of Aussies feeling like they're working harder but falling further behind? In this video, we'll uncover 10 powerful reasons why Australia's middle class is shrinking faster than ever before, and some of them will shock you. From invisible economic shifts to quiet policy changes, this story is bigger than you think, and it affects us all. Stay tuned. You need to hear this. Number 10, lack of policy action. Here's the harsh truth. The Australian middle class isn't just shrinking because of economic forces, it's being abandoned by policy. For years, experts have warned about the growing gap between rich and poor, the housing affordability crisis, stagnant wages, and ballooning household debt. And yet, the response from policymakers has been, at best, sluggish, and at worst, non-existent. Why? Because short-term wins get more political points than long-term solutions. Tax reforms, housing market regulation, wage policy, all of these require bold, often unpopular action. Instead, we see political leaders kicking the can down the road, avoiding tough decisions to protect electoral popularity. Meanwhile, the middle class is left to fight rising living costs, job insecurity, and fewer pathways to financial stability, alone. Let's not forget, the policies that do get implemented often favour those already at the top. Tax breaks for property investors, lenient rules for corporations, and watered-down wage protections mean the system continues to reward wealth, not work. And every year that goes by without meaningful reform, the ladder that once helped everyday Aussies climb into the middle class gets pulled further out of reach. The longer we wait for real change, the harder it will be to reverse this trend. And make no mistake, if the middle class collapses, the entire economy will feel it. If you've ever felt like the system isn't built for you anymore, you're not imagining it. Do you think our leaders are doing enough to protect the middle class? Let us know in the comments. And if you're finding this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into Australia's economic future. Number 9, tax policy and wealth concentration. Australia's tax system is often described as progressive, but in reality, it's quietly helping the wealthy get wealthier, while the middle class is left picking up the slack. It's not about tax rates alone, it's about who benefits from the loopholes, deductions, and incentives built into the system. Take negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. These policies were originally designed to encourage investment, but today, they overwhelmingly benefit property investors and high-income earners. The average middle-class worker can't afford to own 2 or 3 investment properties, but wealthier Australians can, and the system rewards them for it. Meanwhile, middle-income families are taxed heavily on wages, with fewer deductions and virtually no access to the perks of the financial elite. Superannuation tax concessions, family trusts, dividend imputation credits, these all sound complex, but here's the bottom line. The more money you already have, the more the system works in your favour. This leads to wealth concentration, where a small percentage of Australians control a massive chunk of the nation's assets. According to the latest data, the top 20% of households hold over 60% of total wealth. That means less money is circulating through the hands of everyday Australians, and more is locked up in investment portfolios, luxury properties, and tax-advantaged accounts. And what's the result? A shrinking middle class that struggles to build wealth, invest, or plan for the future. It creates a two-speed economy, one for the rich and one for everyone else. When tax policy favours capital over labour and assets over effort, it's no longer a level playing field. It's a tilted system, and the middle class is being slowly squeezed out of it. Number 8, globalisation and job outsourcing. Globalisation was once seen as a win-win, opening up international trade, boosting innovation, and lowering prices. But for Australia's middle class, it's come with a heavy cost: the erosion of stable, well-paying jobs. For decades, manufacturing and industrial jobs formed the backbone of the middle class. These were roles that didn't necessarily require a university degree but still offered decent wages, job security, and pathways to home ownership and retirement. But over time, many of these industries have either downsized or disappeared altogether, as companies moved operations offshore to cut costs. Why pay an Australian worker $30 an hour when the same job can be done overseas for a fraction of the price? That's the hard economic logic that's driving outsourcing, and it's left thousands of Aussies behind. Even in sectors like customer service, IT, and accounting, outsourcing has become common. You may have noticed this when calling a helpline, dealing with a virtual assistant, or seeing tech jobs move to international teams. These changes happen quietly, but their impact is enormous. Entire communities built around manufacturing and service industries are now struggling with underemployment and economic stagnation. And while globalisation brings cheaper goods, it also creates a race to the bottom for wages, especially in sectors where automation and remote work make local labour less essential. This hollowing out effect doesn't just affect those who lose jobs. It puts downward pressure on wages across the board, reducing bargaining power and job security for the rest. The result? A middle class that's slowly being stripped of its foundation, replaced not by new opportunities, but by casual, precarious work that barely covers the rising cost of living. Number 7. Intergenerational wealth gap. One of the most quietly damaging forces behind the shrinking middle class is the widening gap between generations, a divide that's becoming harder and harder to ignore. For older generations, especially baby boomers, buying a home, securing a stable job, and building wealth was once a realistic path. Many purchased property when prices were just 3 or 4 times the average annual income. Fast forward to today, and house prices in cities like Sydney and Melbourne are now more than 10 times the average income. That's not just inflation, that's a complete shift in the rules of the game. Meanwhile, younger Australians are entering adulthood with record levels of student debt, unstable employment, and housing costs that make saving almost impossible. The traditional milestones of middle-class life, buying a home, starting a family, investing for retirement, are now delayed or out of reach entirely for many millennials and Gen Z. What makes this even more unequal is that those who inherit wealth or receive help from family have a major head start, while those without that support fall further behind. It's no longer just about how hard you work, it's increasingly about what you're born into. This growing wealth divide is not just a financial issue, it's a social one. It creates resentment, fuels anxiety, and erodes trust in institutions. People begin to feel like the game is rigged, and for many, it is. The middle class is built on the promise that each generation can do a little better than the last. But when the next generation starts off worse than the one before, that promise begins to break down, and with it, the foundation of a strong and stable society. Number 6. Education costs. Education has always been seen as the great equalizer, the pathway to a better job, a higher income, and a more secure future. But in today's Australia, education is becoming less of a ladder and more of a barrier, especially for the middle class. Even so-called free public education comes with a growing list of hidden costs. Parents are now expected to cover expenses like laptops, uniforms, excursions, extracurricular activities, and voluntary fees that, in practice, aren't so voluntary. These extras can easily run into the thousands per child each year, and that's before even thinking about university. For many young Australians, higher education now means years, even decades, of debt. The average HECS help loan has ballooned, and with indexation linked to inflation, repayments are getting harder to manage. In 2023 alone, student debt rose by over 7% due to indexation, a painful hit to graduates already facing rising rents and stagnant wages. And it's not just about debt. The job market has become so competitive that a single degree often isn't enough anymore. Many are pushed into postgraduate studies just to stay employable, adding even more to the financial burden. This creates a vicious cycle. Students from middle-income families take on more debt to access higher education, then enter a job market that often doesn't pay enough to justify the cost. Meanwhile, wealthier students can afford unpaid internships, private tutors, and industry connections, giving them a major advantage from the start. Over time, the gap between those who can afford to invest in their education and those who can't begins to widen. And when education becomes a financial hurdle instead of a stepping stone, the middle class loses one of its most vital tools for upward mobility. Number 5. Cost of living crisis. Ask almost any Australian today and they'll tell you the same thing. Life is getting more expensive by the week. From groceries and rent to petrol and electricity, the rising cost of living is hitting the middle class where it hurts most, in the everyday essentials. Take a look at the grocery aisle. The same trolley of food that cost $150 a year ago might now cost over $200, and that's without adding anything extra. Items like fresh produce, meat and dairy have seen sharp price increases while portions and packaging quietly shrink. It's called shrinkflation, and it's another way families are getting less for more. Utility bills have become another pressure point. Electricity prices have surged across many states, and gas bills are becoming increasingly difficult to manage, especially during winter. Even basic internet plans, a necessity in modern life, continue to creep upward. And don't forget rent. In cities like Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide, rents have jumped by more than 10% in some areas within a single year. For many middle-class households, more than a third of their income now goes toward housing alone, leaving little left over for savings, emergencies, or even small luxuries. What makes this crisis even more alarming is that wages simply aren't keeping up. While prices soar, income growth has stalled, meaning people are working just as hard, if not harder, but feeling poorer. This isn't just a budgeting issue, it's a structural problem. The cost of maintaining a normal middle-class lifestyle is outpacing what most people can afford. Families are cutting back, dipping into savings, or turning to credit just to make ends meet. And over time, this pressure chips away at their financial stability, and with it, the strength of the middle class itself. Number 4, crushing household debt. Australia has one of the highest levels of household debt in the world, and it's not just a statistic. For millions of middle-class families, it's a daily reality that quietly eats away at their financial freedom and peace of mind. Much of this debt is tied up in mortgages as home buyers stretch their budgets to secure a place in an overheated property market. In some suburbs, people are borrowing up to 8 or 9 times their annual income just to buy a modest home. As interest rates rise, so do mortgage repayments, and many households are now under significant stress trying to keep up. But the problem doesn't stop at housing. Credit card debt, personal loans, car loans, and buy now, pay later schemes have become common ways to bridge the gap between income and expenses. For many, it starts small, covering an unexpected bill, buying school uniforms, or replacing a broken fridge. But over time, it snowballs, creating a constant state of financial tension. Even those who appear to be doing well on the outside, nice home, 2 cars, kids in school, may be quietly drowning in debt behind closed doors. This kind of financial strain makes it harder to save, invest, or plan for the future. It limits choices and keeps people stuck in survival mode. Debt also has a hidden emotional cost. It causes stress, anxiety, and even relationship breakdowns as families struggle to make ends meet under mounting pressure. And because much of this debt is seen as normal, it often goes unspoken until it becomes overwhelming. In a healthy middle class, debt is a tool. But in today's reality, it's becoming a trap, one that more Australians are falling into and fewer are escaping. Number 3, casualisation of work. Once upon a time, a full-time job in Australia meant security, benefits, and a predictable future. It allowed families to budget, save, take out a mortgage, and plan long-term. But today, that kind of job is becoming harder to find. Instead, we're seeing a rapid rise in casual, contract, and gig work, a trend often referred to as the casualisation of the workforce. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, around 1 in 3 workers is now in some form of insecure employment, jobs with no sick leave, no annual leave, and little long-term stability. From rideshare drivers and food delivery riders to freelance professionals and casual retail staff, many Australians now face a working life built on uncertainty. For businesses, it's cheaper and more flexible. But for workers, it means inconsistent income, limited access to loans or mortgages, and a constant worry about whether they'll have enough hours next week. It's not just affecting young people either. More adults in their 30s, 40s, and even 50s are finding themselves in jobs that offer no long-term guarantees. This shift has a huge impact on the middle class. It's hard to build a life, let alone a future, when your job could disappear overnight. Without reliable income, people can't save, invest, or make big decisions like buying a home or starting a family. Superannuation contributions are often lower or non-existent in casual roles, leaving workers with less to retire on. There's also a psychological toll. Living from paycheck to paycheck, constantly hustling for shifts or contracts, creates a sense of instability and burnout. And when more and more of the workforce is stuck in this cycle, the foundation of the middle class begins to crack. Number 2, wage stagnation. One of the most frustrating realities facing Australia's middle class today is this: wages just aren't keeping up. Despite working longer hours, taking on more responsibilities, and facing rising costs in nearly every area of life, most Australians haven't seen meaningful wage growth in over a decade. According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, real wage growth has been essentially flat since 2013. That means that even if your paycheck has technically gone up, its purchasing power, what you can actually buy with it, has stayed the same or even declined. With inflation eating away at everyday spending power, it often feels like you're treading water just to survive. This stagnation hits the middle class hardest. These are the people who earn too much to qualify for support, but not enough to easily absorb rising living costs. So while essentials like housing, groceries, fuel, childcare, and healthcare become more expensive, incomes stay frustratingly static. Meanwhile, the cost of getting ahead continues to rise, whether it's education, professional training, or trying to invest in property or business. And without regular wage increases, families are forced to make tough choices, delay major life goals, dip into savings, or take on more debt just to maintain their standard of living. Wage stagnation also affects mental well-being. It creates a sense of being stuck, of working hard but going nowhere. It undermines motivation and trust in the system, especially when CEO bonuses and corporate profits continue to rise, while everyday workers are told to tighten their belts. For the middle class, steady wage growth isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Without it, the gap between effort and reward keeps widening, and the promise of a fair go starts to feel more like a myth than a reality. Number 1. Skyrocketing housing prices. If there's one issue that perfectly captures the pressure on Australia's middle class, it's housing affordability, or more accurately, the lack of it. For decades, owning a home was seen as a key pillar of the Australian dream. But today, for many middle-income earners, that dream is slipping further and further out of reach. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, the median house price now exceeds $1 million. Even in smaller cities and regional areas, prices have surged at record levels over the past decade. Meanwhile, wages have remained stagnant, creating a massive disconnect between income and property value. What used to take 5 years of saving for a deposit might now take 10 or more. This isn't just a problem for first home buyers. Rents are skyrocketing too, putting intense pressure on those who can't afford to buy. Families are being forced to downsize, move further away from work or schools, or live paycheck to paycheck just to keep a roof over their heads. In some areas, rental bidding wars have become the norm, something that was once unheard of. Part of the issue lies in demand far outpacing supply, especially in urban centres. But it's also tied to property investors dominating the market, taking advantage of tax incentives like negative gearing and capital gains discounts, often outbidding owner-occupiers. This pushes prices even higher, leaving everyday Australians with fewer chances to buy. Housing used to be a way for the middle class to build security and generational wealth, but now it's becoming a tool that divides society, between those who got in early and those left behind. As property becomes less about living and more about investing, the middle class is being priced out of the very foundation it once relied on. The shrinking of Australia's middle class isn't happening overnight. It's a slow sile. Net erosion driven by multiple forces working at once. From sky-high housing prices and crushing debt to wage stagnation, insecure jobs, and rising everyday costs, the pressure is mounting on families who once felt secure. What's most alarming is that many of these changes are happening quietly, beneath the surface, while life goes on. People are working harder, cutting back, and doing all the right things, yet still feel like they're falling behind. And when policy fails to respond, the system begins to tilt further in favour of the wealthy, leaving the middle class to carry the burden. But this isn't just an economic story, it's a national one, because a strong, stable middle class is the backbone of any healthy society. When it crumbles, we all feel the impact. So, the big question is, how long can this go on before something gives? If this video helped you see the bigger picture, stay tuned, because understanding the problem is just the first step. In upcoming videos, we'll explore what you can do to protect yourself and adapt in this changing economic landscape.